Nobody? Carly, what do you got?
We just feel like you can't separate being in from Dasein or from Dasein's world. Like, the world isn't something that Dasein sometimes has a relationship with or sometimes interacts with, but it's always like it's necessary. It's a part of, or not even a part of Dasein, but it is what Dasein is being in its world.
Okay, good. Yeah, it's inseparable, right? You're not sometimes in the world and then sometimes somewhere else. It's never possible. Others? Does that make pretty good sense? You're always in the world. And in the world in such a way that the world isn't the sort of thing that is separable from you in any way. It is you, right? So that therefore being in it is always what you are. No matter where you go, you're always you. You're always in that world. The world that is yours, right? Okay, good. Now we're going to jump. I'm not going to do anything with section 13 right now. You can figure that out with the quiz. We're going to jump to section 14. Was that useful for you to have to try to explain it to each other? Sort of think it through? Yeah, there really is no shortcut, right? Like, even when you're reading it, you should, even though there's nobody necessarily right next to you, although maybe there is, you should stop and try to explain it to yourself, right? That's how you do it. That's why it should be a lot harder, or it takes a lot longer to read Heidegger than it does to read lots of other things, because you can't just breeze through it. You have to stop and say, wait, now what did I just read, right? What did that mean? And you make guesses, right? So, is it getting easier, do you think, yet? You're 90 pages into it. It's like reading Shakespeare or something, right? You start to get used to the approach and the language and all of that. Okay, so look at 14. We're going to read some together here. Being in the world shall first be made visible with regard to that item of its structure, which is the world itself. So we're going to talk about the world, what can be meant by describing the world as a phenomenon. Okay, first he's going to talk about the things the world is not. Things that are within the world, things like things of nature, things invested with value. So look on page 92. If we think of the world as that thing that's full of stuff, the world that has in it rainforests and oceans and classrooms and tables and chairs and fellow students and other things, right? And you're just compiling all the things that are in the world. There you're thinking of the world as something separate from Dasein, something that's there and that Dasein walks in and moves around and sort of takes up a position here and then somewhere over there, right? All of those ways. Or you think of the world as just the nature, right? The natural world. And then there's the artificial, technological world of man, and our man's world is sort of at odds with the natural world. Or you think of the natural world as the thing we have to study with all of our different physics and mathematical sciences and things, right? All of those ways of thinking about the world, that's not the world. Then you might think, okay, well, maybe the world is the things that are in the world that we value, right? Those are the things that matter in the world. And Heidegger says, no, but you're closer. When you think about things that matter or that have value to a Dasein as making up the world, you're a little bit closer to what a world is, but it still doesn't get at the world as the world. So look at right around 64. Heidegger says, neither the ontical depiction of entities within the world, nor the ontological interpretation of their being is such as to reach the phenomenon of the world. And both of these ways of access to objective being, the world has already been presupposed, and indeed in various ways. So the world is not that stuff that's out there that I can study or like or dislike. It's not like that, right? So he distinguishes between one way of thinking of the world as a subjective experience of just, I am in my own world, right? Something like that. I have a daughter who, you could be talking to her, she's not wearing headphones, and she, like when you're done, it's as if you had not said a thing. Like she is just in her own world. It's not like goes in one ear and out the other. It doesn't ever get in the first ear to go out the other side. And we say, she's in her own world, right? That's like a subjective world, right? Like the world of your own interpretation, the world of your own making, whatever. That is not the meaning of the word world. But also, it isn't the flip side of that, which would be the objective world of just factual things, the real world. Well, and there we might say, you got to live in the world. You got to be here in the real world with us, right? And by that we would mean, you got to deal with reality, with the stuff that's, the real stuff. Not the world in your own head, the one that's real. Neither of those gets at the world. Even though we could talk about the world in both of those ways, right? And we use the word world in both of those ways. That's not it. So we're looking for not the common world, the one that's the objective world that we all have to live in, nor the personal idiosyncratic subjective world that I live in. Those are not the phenomenon of the world. That's not the existentiale of the world. The structure of the world that we live in. You're in the wrong class right now, but yours starts at 3:30, and then we'll be here. But you can stay here if you want to. Now, world, the way Heidegger gives it to us on page 93, can be said in 4 different ways. And he wants to distinguish these 4 so that we pick the right one. The third one is the way he's going to use the word world from now on. So that's the important one for us. But it's useful to see these other ones so you know what it isn't versus what it is. So the first way the world could be used is an ontical concept and signifies the totality of those entities which can be present at hand within the world. Right? So the first way we can use the word world is in an ontical sense, and it's the totality of things that are present at hand in the world. Can anybody explain that or give some examples of how that would work? Using the word ontically as the totality of things present at hand. Just give me some examples from things right here. What are some things in the world present at hand ontically? Chair. Desk. Marker. Book. Right? So we could say the world is full of things like chairs, markers, books, carpet, glass, steel, metal, buildings, cities, nations, highways, forests, rivers. All of those things are things that are present at hand. They have presence at hand as their way of being. And if you add them all up, you get something like the world. The world is the totality, all of those things together that are present at hand. You can use the word world like that, and it makes perfect sense, right? It's not the way we're going to mean it. But that is a way of using the word world. Second way, world functions as an ontological term. It signifies the being of those entities we have just mentioned. And indeed, world can become a term for any realm which encompasses a multiplicity of entities. For instance, and it's nice that he gave us this example, because otherwise it might be hard to wrap your mind around what he meant there. For instance, when one talks of the world of a mathematician, world signifies the realm of possible objects of mathematics. Mathematics is a great example for this, but I'm going to use something that's a little bit more watered down. It's not quite as theoretically pure, but it is useful. In the world of a rock star. This is a perfectly sensible phrase, the world of a rock star, right? What are the things that are in the world of a rock star? A band. Music. Fans. Like a true rock star, adoring fans, groupies, tour buses, money, probably drugs. That ain't nothing. Get your money for nothing and your kicks for free. All of them. Right? There's stages, concerts, lights, loud noise, screaming fans. Now, technically, those are in my world too. I mean, they're in the world in the first sense of all of us. But isn't it different when I say the world of a rock star? We mean these belong in a special way to that rock starring Dasein, and not just Professor Dasein. In the world of a professor, unfortunately, there are not screaming fans, money, music, loud noises, stages, adoring groupies. Those belong in the world of a rock star, not in the world of a professor. And if a professor ever gets those, something wrong with the professoring going on there, right? They become something other than being a professor. Does that make sense? So the world of a student has things that belong in that world. Now those are also things that are in the world of everybody else. They're in the world of a banker too, right? Like these tables and chairs technically are in the world of the rock star, but not in the way that we mean world when we say the world of a rock star, right? We mean those particular things that belong to that particular facticity, that way of being, that way of taking up one's being in the world. Does that make sense? Right? So in the second sense, world can mean ontologically the being of those things in the world of some Dasein who's taken up some particular position or stand in that world. A rock star, right? Or a mathematician, right? World can be understood in another ontical sense, not, however, as those entities which Dasein essentially is not, and which can be encountered within the world. That is not as in that present at hand stuff, right? Because that's not what Dasein is. But rather as that wherein a factical Dasein as such can be said to live. World here has a pre-ontological existential signification. Here again there are different possibilities. World may stand for the public we world or one's own closest domestic environment. Here, what do we mean by the word world, then? I'll say it again this way. It's the world in which some Dasein lives. Yeah, something like that. And it can have two different sort of ways of going. The common world, or the public world that we live in, and then the private home world, right? I asked you before when we were talking about the notion of living in or being in that Dasein has as existence. Being in for existence factically means you're dwelling alongside, right? You're at home. You have a livedness. You live in it, right? So the world that you live in is a world. And that world has its common public moments and its closest own domestic or private moments, right? And even within your home, there can be variations of the depth of the intimacy of the world, right? For instance, for a teenager, sometimes the door closed, the headphones on, that's the most innermost sanctified world, right? That is my closest, ownmost world. Even being in the kitchen, having to share that space with other people, it interrupts my own. But it's still part of the world I am living in, right? You're in the world of a philosopher when you read Heidegger, and it may not feel like you're at home in that world. But it's a part of the world you're living in, and therefore it is an ontical world when you're in it, right? It's that world that you're in and that you're living through, happily or unhappily, comfortably or uncomfortably, awkwardly or right at home. That is still the world you're in. And that's the third sense of the word world, right? And then the fourth sense, worldhood, that it could be the ontological existential concept of worldhood. Here what we mean by worldhood is what we're doing right now in analyzing existentially the notion of world. So when we're talking about the world you live in, but we're not talking about the world you live in. We're just talking about in general, what is it to live in a world that you live in, living in the world as Dasein. That's worldhood, right? We're just talking generically.
It's like being in the zone.
No.
In your own zone.
Dude, you can't come in at halftime and expect to play the game. Wait with any questions you have for this class after. And I'm happy to have you, but yeah, you just happen to wander in early to your next class, which is cool. I'm happy for it. But be quiet. Everybody else can talk. So the world you live in is the world that is yours. That's the third sense, right? The fourth sense is an ontological, existential. This one here is ontical. This one is ontological. Okay, so here, this is just all the stuff that's present at hand, right? Here, this is the world of, and it's some Dasein who's factically existing in that world, right? The world of a mathematician or the world of a whatever. And here you get the ontical world of a living Dasein, right? And then here you get worldhood. And worldhood is just trying to get at what is going on here. Right? We're just reflecting on and trying to bring to light this. And the circle in this, the difficulty is that in order to see this, you're still doing it. You never step outside of your world to see your world. So that talking about worldhood is extremely difficult because you're doing the world, trying to think about it as a world. And it's as close to transcendence as we get. Transcendence is what being is. It's the transcendent. It is what makes entities entities. So he's not going to talk much about worldhood, but he's going to try, in talking about world, help you see it. And so we're doing worldhood, maybe, something like that, right? So what he says finally, he says, we are going to use the word